Hello, welcome to BEH 221, Resolution-Based Counseling Skills. Today's presentation will include multicultural competence, ethics, positive psychology, and resilience. So let's start off with discussing multicultural competence. It is imperative in the interview process to be competent in understanding other people's multiracial background, because this enables us to understand their uniqueness more fully. Without a basic understanding of and a sensitivity to a client's uniqueness, the interviewer will fail to establish a relationship and a true grasp of a client's issues. The rise of the multicultural movement in the United States can be traced to the Civil Rights Act, which was in the mid-1960s, 1963, 1964, followed by the growth of awareness in activists from groups such as African Americans, women, the disabled, LGBT or lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered individuals, and Vietnam War veterans, and others. So basically from the mid-60s up until today, we're beginning to see an understanding that, the melting pot, especially in the United States, is so filled with differences that it's an important aspect to identity, and that we have to understand these issues in order to really understand our clients. Counseling was slow to respond to this movement, but gradually it has become a central force in what is termed psychological liberation. Psychological liberation occurs when clients discover that what they saw as a personal issue is not just their problem. With the counselor's help, clients begin to see that external racism, sexism, heterosexism, or other forms of oppression are the underlying cause of many of their concerns. For example, veterans returning from Vietnam were often hospitalized and were given diagnoses such as depressed, manic, or schizophrenic, when, the reality was for many of these veterans, they were dealing with post-traumatic stress that created, these issues of depression or mania. So we have to look at the multicultural aspect of a client to really understand where they're coming from. For example, how do we report crimes against women? How many women are raped? We don't ever say men rape this many women. It's always women are the victims. So we have to look at how we use the rhetoric or the words in all of these things. As psychiatrists observed this phenomenon with the Vietnam vets, they came up with the label for PTSD. We believe that this term is inaccurate because external stressors are the real cause of the internalized issues. Consider deleting the word disorder and using just post-traumatic stress. By labeling stress symptomology as a disorder, psychiatry turned the logical result of living in an insane environment into an illness. So if you think about it from this perspective, in terms of you're raised from the time you're a little person, little boy or a little girl, you don't hit, you're not supposed to hurt people, you're supposed to play nice. All of these rules that we have embraced through our childhood, we suddenly, when we go to war, especially in Vietnam, because so many of these young men were drafted, not volunteered, and they did not want to fight. And they did not want to fight a battle that they didn't understand. We were in Vietnam to try to prevent it from becoming a communist country. It had nothing to do with, oil. It had nothing to do with them killing all their people. That's not a big issue for us at that point. So, we have taught people certain rules in society, and then we push them into a war where the rules went out the window, and now they're supposed to be killing women, children. They're supposed to be identifying enemies and neutralizing them. So there's this cognitive dissonance that goes on when people go through a wartime event. And it doesn't matter if it was Vietnam, World War II, World War I. You can go all the way back to the Roman and Greek wars, and people were especially traumatized by them. Similarly, the helping professions have all too often failed to see that the issues that clients bring to us are deeply involved with societal dysfunction, harassment, and oppression. The multicultural movement shows that we need to examine external causes of personal concerns, whether clients are people of color, those affected by a disability, those with mental issues, or children and adolescents who are bullied. So, a person who is Caucasian or white and live in the middle of the country like Kansas, and they are part of the dominant society, are going to have much different experiences than someone who's a minority who lives, very isolated from the rest of his or her tribe, so to speak. The respectful model takes us more deeply into multicultural understanding. As you consider the issues of multiculturality, we ask that you also examine your beliefs and attitudes towards those who are similar to and multiculturally different from you. Do not view the respectful model as just a list of difficult issues and concerns. Rather, look at this list as a source of information about client resilience. Because remember, the more we know about our clients, the more we can identify those skill sets that they bring to the table that will help them persevere and persist through the hard times. Clients can draw amazing strength from their religious or spiritual background, the positive pride associated with racial, ethnic identity, or family background, or the community in which they grew up. So there are 10 factors in the respectful model. Number 1, religious or spiritual identity. Some clients are affected by their religion through transcendental experiences that extend beyond the ordinary. Others may identify with no religion at all. In the United States, it's always considered that we're a Christian, quote-unquote, country, despite the fact that there's freedom of religion. You go to other countries, especially somewhere in Northern Europe like Sweden or Norway, and the vast majority of people are atheists. So, we as, counselors have to understand that the person's spiritual connection, whether it is, with an affiliated religion or without affiliated religion, is a very individual part of their identity. Number 2, economic class background. Class standing and roles influence a client's development and as such affects their own identification of their strengths and expression of problems throughout therapy or counseling. Whether or not you come from the upper echelons of socioeconomic classes or you come from a working class or poor background, that's going to also really help you understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. Sexual identity influences personal development, especially for people who've been oppressed because of their sexuality, which reduces an individual's sense of self-worth. So if you grow up in a very small town and you are gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and you have had to hide it, and it has brought you no joy, and it has brought you nothing but feelings of inadequacy, your perception of yourself is going to be much different than a young person growing up in a metropolitan area like New York or Los Angeles who have been accepted for their sexual identity from the time they were, very young. Number 4, psychological maturity. This type of maturity involves the ability of an individual to respond to a situation or their environment in an appropriate manner based upon their psychological strengths and needs. How do you deal with stress? Are you somebody who can, let it roll off your back? Can you manage it? Number 5, ethnic, cultural, racial identity. Some clients experience within-group differences which could influence their psychological development. For example, you are somebody who is African American who, doesn't fit into the roles that your friends and your family expect you to fit within. That oftentimes can create, again, cognitive dissonance about who you are and what your experience should be. Number 6, chronological developmental challenges. Physical, cognitive, and psychological skill development affects how an individual's experiences challenges at different points in life. How you deal with getting your heart broken at 13 is going to be much different than getting your heart broken at 18. Number 7, trauma and other threats to one's well-being. Stressful situations can put individuals at risk for psychological dangers when the ability to cope with them becomes ineffective. So again, if you're in such a traumatic situation, i.e. natural disaster or a wartime environment, it surpasses your ability to cope with these kinds of issues. Number 8, family, history, and dynamics. Family can play a role in a person's sense of self and ambition and prejudices. The modern family is now one with much more diversification, less rigidity, and broadened horizon. Number 9, unique physical characteristics. People who possess unique physical characteristics may experience stress of dissatisfaction. It is on part of the counselor to reflect on the internalized negative views of stereotypes. If you were born with a body part that was malformed, like an ear or part of your face, or you have a physical abnormality in the rest of your body, that is going to really play a huge part on how you see yourself, because you're also internalizing how people see you. And finally, location of residence and language differences. Depending upon the climate patterns, geological terrain, and types of occupations available, individuals will possess various strengths and interests. Being aware of stereotypes and biases associated with individuals who speak a different dialect can differ from inaccurate assumptions. So, if you come from an area in New York where everybody around you has kind of that Brooklyn accent, and then you move to the Manhattan area, which people tend to have less of a Brooklyn accent, you may feel uniquely isolated because you don't fit in with these others. So even something where you're moving just 5 or 6 miles from one area to another can have a deep, meaningful impact on how you see yourself. So even with all elements that we've just discussed, one of the issues that we have to look at is cultural trauma within each of the respectful dimensions. Large historical events and daily microaggressions in the form of insults to one's color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, disability result in personal and group trauma, frustration, anger, hopelessness, and depression. In this country, one of the most traumatic cultural experiences is the experience of the Native Americans and how they were literally stripped of their land, put in concentration camps. I mean, that's what reservations truly were. Their language, their religion, their customs, their culture was stripped from them completely. And as a result, Native Americans have one of the largest rates of suicide, alcoholism, school dropout. Native Americans have truly been traumatized over the last 300 years in this country. Multiculturalism needs to consider present and past histories of oppression, but we also need to look at each multicultural group for its positive strengths and what gives each positive resilience. So the picture on this slide is from the Holocaust during World War II, when the Nazis decided that Jews should be exterminated, and they tried their best to exterminate as many as they could. And ultimately what they ended up doing was the Jewish people came back stronger. They identified and petitioned for their own homeland. Israel, which is a very strong military power today. The concept of never again has always been part of the Jewish experience for the past 70 years since the World War II has ended. And as we look to see these cultures and the trauma they experience, individuals within that culture are very different, but the culture themselves all share that particular trauma. Privilege is power given to people through cultural assumptions and stereotypes. McIntosh comments on the invisibility of whiteness. European Americans tend to be unaware of the advantages they have because of the color of their skin. For those with white privilege comes the awareness that white people are a minority in the global population. Within the United States, there are presently more infants and preschoolers of so-called minorities than whites, so that during your work life and helping, whites will become the new minority. So right now in the United States, whites make up approximately 65% of the population. But the Hispanic population is growing tremendously. The Asian population is growing tremendously. The white population is not growing tremendously. So you're beginning to see this, shift, and that's why a lot of times you'll see, this racial aggression coming out against minorities, because white people are understanding that, their dominance in the United States is beginning to wane. This little cartoon on the right-hand side is white privilege to a T. They're both holding a sign, equal justice, white guy on one side, a black guy on the other, and the police are hassling the black guy. Do you have a permit? So, this is white privilege in a nutshell. Income inequality and rigid class structures are now recognized as central multicultural issues, perhaps even more important than other respectful issues. Students often accumulate immense amount of debt, and many of these same students fail to complete their education. Connections and personal influence are the way that most people find internships and later good jobs. In short, societal structures are such that moving from one social class to another is almost impossible. So what we look at here is, does everybody start at the same level? No, of course not. If your parents are upper middle class and you never had to worry about having dinner on the table or have to worry about where you're going to get money for your textbooks for class, that's a much different experience than a lot of other people. So, for example, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see a cartoon, and you have the wealthy, which is the giant guy in green and yellow with the W, and then the poor person, who is the tiny little guy standing next to the referee on the left with the P on his helmet, and it's called the Income Inequality Bowl. And the referee is saying, I refuse to admit this game is fixed. Because, again, what we're looking at here is not necessarily that poor people don't have opportunities, but they don't start at the same spot. So if you're running a 100-yard dash and the wealthy person gets to start at 0 and you get to start at negative 400 yards, you're going to have to run a lot farther to get to the same spot that he or she will end up at. So what does social justice or this type of privilege mean to you, for you, as you work with clients and others who face these obstacles? Listening to stories is obviously important, but a more activist teaching, consulting, and coaching role is needed. Consider becoming a mentor and helping your clients understand and cope with a challenging system. This is an area for social justice action. However, avoid stereotyping anyone or any group's cultural identity. Multicultural awareness enriches uniqueness only when it allows us to become more aware of how much each person is different from the other. You, the interviewer, face challenges. For example, if you are a middle-class, European American, heterosexual male, and the client is a working-class female of a different ethnicity or race, it can become more difficult to gain trust and rapport. And remember, in any therapeutic relationship, that ability to trust your therapist is the leading indicator of whether or not therapy will be effective. If you are a young person of color and the client is older, white, and of a markedly different spiritual orientation, again, it takes time to develop a relationship, a working alliance. The American Counseling Association and the American Psychological Association have developed multicultural guidelines and specific competencies for practice. In these statements, the words multiculturalism and diversity are defined broadly to include many dimensions as represented in the respectful model. The multicultural competencies include awareness, knowledge, and skills. Cultural competency training is now a requirement for medical licensure in several states and has become a standard in many helping professions. The competency guidelines also speak to how contextual issues beyond a person's control affect the way a person discusses issues and problems. Oppression, discrimination, sexism, racism, and failure to recognize and take disability into account may deeply affect clients without their conscious awareness. Is the problem in the individual or in the environment? For example, you may need to help clients become aware that issues such as tension, headaches, and high blood pressure may be results of the stress caused by harassment and oppression. Many issues are not just client problems, but rather problems of a larger society. Worldview is formally defined as the way you and your client interpret humanity and the world. Multicultural competence stresses the importance of being aware of possible negative emotional reactions and biases towards those who are different from us. If people have learned to view certain groups through inaccurate stereotypes, we especially need to listen and learn respect for the worldview of the client and be careful not to impose your own ideas, your own values, your own judgments. You have to listen. That is the most important skill set you bring when working with a multicultural client. Traditional approaches to counseling theory and skills may be inappropriate and/or ineffective with some groups. We also need to give special attention to how socioeconomic factors, racism, sexism, heterosexism, and other oppressive forces may influence a client's worldview. People of color encounter more poverty, violence, income disparities, and a variety of other discriminatory situations. Just getting a taxi in downtown New York can be difficult for an African American, even one wearing business attire. And again, these are just prejudices that other people have brought to their community or their culture, and it has oppressed another group of people. These large and small insults and slights, termed microaggressions, can result in physical and mental health problems. Repeated racial harassment or bullying can literally result in post-traumatic stress. What seems small at first is damaging through repetition. This is not a disorder, but a logical result of external oppression. As you work with minority clients, it is vital that you remain aware of the impact that these external system pressures and oppressions may be having. One useful intervention in such situations is encouraging and helping those clients to examine how forms of oppression may relate to their present headaches, stomach upsets, high blood pressure, and an array of psychological stressors. So, in a sense, what we're looking at is that the societal issues that we are dealing with can cause the physical manifestations that we perceive in our own bodies. So, when we are dealing with any kind of client issue, we have to look at just not their specific issue, but the issues that are represented by their culture, their identity, their sense of self. A classic study found that 50% of minority clients did not return to counseling after their first session. Traditional counseling strategies are being adopted for use in a more culturally respectful manner. It is important to be mindful of cultural bias in assessment and testing instruments and the impact of discrimination on clients. Becoming multiculturally competent requires a lifetime of learning and a willingness to act on that knowledge. So, we can be as multicultural as we can be, but we have to make sure that we're putting that into action. Political correctness, or PC, is a term used to describe language that is calculated to provide a minimum of offense, particularly to the racial, cultural, or other identity groups being described. The existence of political correctness has been denounced by conservative, liberal, and other commentators. The term and its usage is hotly contested. Given this controversy, what is the appropriate way to name and discuss cultural diversity? We argue that interviewers and counselors should use language empathetically, and we urge that you use terms that the client prefers. Let the client define the name that is to be used, as it is respect of the client's point of view that accounts in the issue of naming. So if you have a LGBT client, do they prefer gay? Do they prefer lesbian? Do they prefer homosexual? There's a variety of terms that we can use to identify who they are as their identity, but you have to find out which one they're most comfortable with. Some people in their 70s resent being called elderly or old, whereas others embrace and prefer this language. A person struggling with sexual identity may find the word gay or lesbian difficult to deal with at first. You can help clients by exploring names and social identifiers in a more positive fashion. People who are third, fourth generation Americans but who come from an Asian background oftentimes find it difficult to identify their unique Asianness because they feel so American. And again, that is all well and good in a multicultural society, but you put an Asian person in the middle of Arizona, well, not Arizona, let's go with Montana, and they're going to be only identified as Asian and not necessarily as a fourth generation American who's been in this country their entire lives. Ethics are thoughtful, professional lists of do's and don'ts for our profession. Morals are the way we apply ethics through our commitment to excellence, reverence for others, and willingness to take action to engage life for ourselves and others. Ethical codes can be summarized with the following statement: do no harm to your clients. Treat them responsibly with full awareness of the social context of helping. As interviewers and counselors, we are morally responsible for our clients and for society as well. At times, these responsibilities conflict, and you may need to seek detailed guidance from documented ethical codes, your supervisor, or other professionals. So, within any kind of helping profession, we encounter things that are black and white. If you have a child that's being sexually abused, that's an easy one. You must report that. If you have a child that you think might be emotionally abused, but there's no scars, there's no overt abuse, that's a little bit more challenging in terms of how do you manage the ethics of reporting that. We have said that the emphatic relationship is central to developing a working alliance, but without confidentiality and trust as our basis, we will have no relationship. Thus, from the very beginning, the amount of confidentiality you can provide your client needs to be crystal clear. And if you remember back in some of our 100 level classes, going over what you are allowed to share and not share is very important with the client so that they understand what is legal in terms of keeping things confidential and what is illegal in terms of keeping something confidential. You have to spell out the limits at the beginning of any therapeutic relationship. Professionals encounter many challenges to confidentiality. Some states require you to inform parents before counseling a child and to share information from interviews with them if they ask. If issues of abuse should arise, you must report this to the authorities. If the client is a danger to themselves or others, then rules of confidentiality change. The issue of reporting such information needs to be discussed with your supervisor. Dual relationships can present challenging ethical and moral issues. They occur when you have more than one relationship with a client. Another way to think of this concept is a conflict of interest. So if your client is a classmate or friend, you are engaged in a dual relationship. If you live in a small town, you are likely to encounter some of your clients at the grocery store or elsewhere. So if you live in a small town and you're a counselor, you may engage professionally with people that you are also counseling. So for example, the person who does your hair might be a client for therapy. The girl who babysits your children might actually end up being in one of your group therapy sessions. So again, there's a lot of these dual relationships that become very murky when you look at the ethics of them. The American Counseling Association focuses the preamble to its Code of Ethics on diversity as a central ethical issue. The American Counseling Association is an educational, scientific, and professional organization whose members work in a variety of settings and serve in multiple capacities. Counseling is a professional relationship that empowers diverse individuals, families, and groups to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. Human service professionals have added a moral, personal dimension to this ethical statement. They first speak of the need for advocacy for the rights of others, particularly groups that have been disadvantaged or oppressed. You will work with clients who have made mistaken moral judgments about themselves. Some clients may be judging themselves too harshly for what they have done or left undone. Other clients may fail to recognize their own moral failures. You will have an interesting challenge as you face the moral dilemmas of clients, both those of which that are aware and those that they deny, ignore, and may not even be aware of. When you work with children, the ethical issues around informed consent can become especially important. An essential part of the informed consent is stating that both child and parents have the right to withdraw their permission at any point. Needless to say, these same principles apply to all clients. The main difference is parental awareness and consent. Jane Addams, the founder of social work, has infused her thinking throughout the National Association of Social Workers. Their code of ethics is strongest on social justice and emphasizes that action beyond the interview in the community may be needed to address unfairness of many types. We now know that childhood poverty, adversity, and stress produce lifelong damage to the brain. These changes are visible in cells and neurons and include permanent changes in DNA. Therefore, just treating children of poverty through supportive counseling is not enough. For significant change to occur, prevention and social justice action are critical. There are two major types of social justice action. The first and most commonly discussed is action in the community to work against the destructive influences of poverty, racism, and all forms of discrimination. These preventative strategies are now considered vital dimension of the complete counselor or therapist. The second type of social justice action occurs in the interview. When a female client discusses mistreatment and harassment by her supervisor, the issue of oppression of women should be named as such. The social justice perspective requires you to help her understand that the problem is not caused by her behavior or how she dresses. By naming the problem as sexism and harassment, you often free the client from self-blame and empower her for action. You can also support her in her efforts to change, go through change in the workplace. We as counselors, therapists, anyone who's in the helping profession, have to always be supportive when someone is trying to change for the better. Positive psychology's central aim is to encourage and develop optimism and resilience. Optimism is defined in various dictionaries, with many affirmative words, among them hope, confidence, and cheerfulness. It also includes a trust in which we expect things to work out and to get better, a sense of personal power, and a belief in the future. Optimism is a key dimension of resilience and the ability to recover and learn from one's difficulties and challenges. So, little cartoon, Captain Optimism, I will defeat you, versus pessimistic man, yeah, probably. So, when we look at these dimensions, we have to remember that you have to work towards optimism. It's easy to fall into a pessimistic perspective. It's much harder to seek out that silver lining that someone is always telling us will eventually show up. Evidence-based research has shown that people who are more optimistic have an increased ability to eliminate, reduce, or manage stressors and negative emotions. Furthermore, they are better able to approach and face their difficulties. Optimists tend to live healthier lives, suffer less from physical illness, and, of course, feel better about themselves and their abilities. Out of this research has come an effective 6-point scale to measure optimism. One of our goals in counseling and therapy is to increase resilience, and helping clients become more optimistic and hopeful is part of this process. A positive attitude appears critical for the development of resilience. In recent years, the field of counseling has developed an extensive body of knowledge and research supporting the importance of positive psychology, a strength-based approach. The positive psychology movement is well aware that happiness is not possible in the midst of excessive stress. In addition to drawing out the problematic negative stories, we also need to search for stories of strengths and success. So oftentimes people want to vent and complain and just really look at the negative side of relationships. And as part of our job in the therapeutic environment, we have to also help them identify the strengths or the positives that have occurred in these stressful times. Seek out and listen for times when clients have succeeded in overcoming obstacles. Listen for and be curious about their competencies, the heroic stories that reflect their part in surmounting obstacles, initiating action, and maintaining positive change. In the micro skills, we call this the positive asset search. Find something that the client is doing right and discover the client's resources and supports. Use these strengths and positive assets as a foundation for personal growth and resolving issues. Encouraging and teaching clients to become fully engaged in life is basic to positive psychology. Therapeutic Lifestyle Changes, or TLCs, discussed in the following section are a key route to identifying exercise, better nutrition, meditation, and helping others, which in turn helps us feel better about ourselves. Some 20 million new neural connections or synapses are made and lost every day. We need to make new ones to compensate for those we lose. Therapeutic Lifestyle Changes, TLCs, facilitate the development of new connections and brain health. They can increase cognitive reserves along with self-esteem, mental and physical health, even happiness and longevity. TLCs are cost-effective, backed up by extensive research in neuroscience, psychology, and medicine. TLCs now need to become central in interviewing and counseling practice, as useful in the session as counseling and therapeutic theories. As we move to a more positive approach to mental and physical health, we are recognizing a new role for interviewing and counseling. While all of the TLCs are supported by research, be aware that a team approach may be required. You cannot be an expert in all therapeutic lifestyle changes. As needed, refer clients to medical personnel, nutritionists, physical therapists, personal trainers, and other behavioral health professionals. TLCs build brain and body health, resulting in a longer lifespan with more joy and zest. TLCs help prevent Alzheimer's, so an early start is wise. So working towards finding a more positive approach in life, a more positive perspective, optimism, resilience will benefit you for literally every day of your life. Physical exercise increases brain volume. It is also valuable in obesity prevention, may help prevent cancer, and may slow the onset of Alzheimer's. Nutrition, weight, and supplements, which are relatively new to our field, is the importance of helping clients deal with the central health and brain issue of nutrition. Social relations, being with people in a positive way, makes a significant difference in wellness. Cognitive challenge, take a course, learn a language, learn to play an instrument. Forcing your brain to work out, in a sense, makes you a better, happier person. Meditation and relaxation. If you meditate 10 to 20 minutes or more each day, it will make a significant difference and calm you throughout the day. Multicultural pride and cultural identity. Our personal identity as multicultural beings affects both our mental and physical health. Identify your multicultural identity through the respectful model. A positive psychology wellness approach recognizes that multiple forms of oppression do exist, but finding personal and cultural strengths can increase one's self-respect and strengthen one's identity. So, when we see on TV the Puerto Rican Day Parade or the Gay Pride Parade or, the Day of Service for Martin Luther King, where, a particular culture comes together to celebrate their culture, there is a added bonus of a increase in our mental health, increase in our physical health, and an increase in our spiritual sense of self. So all of these things are really important, and refusing to look at your identity or your culture as important to you can cause more problems in the long run. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact your instructor if you are attending one of our classes. If you do not attend school here but still have a question, please leave a comment and we will respond as quickly as we can. Thank you and have a fabulous day.